Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're looking at something that feels so familiar, yet is so deeply misunderstood, the Filipino home. You know, when we look at houses in the Philippines, it's really easy to just see aesthetics or passing design trends, but that completely misses the real narrative. The architecture of the Philippine archipelago isn't just about what looks good. It's a profound, relentless story of survival. It is literally a continuous record of human beings adapting to extreme weather, tectonic volatility, and massive historical shifts.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture an extreme contrast. On one hand, you have a 16th century woven bamboo hut, totally porous and hovering just above a swamp. On the other, a 21st century sealed, heavily air-conditioned concrete condominium soaring into a hyperdense urban sky. So how exactly did the Filipino home make this incredible leap? I mean, how did we go from a horizontal, breathable structure completely integrated with nature to a vertical, heavily fortified megastructure designed to basically shut nature out?
Well, to understand that massive leap, here's our chronological journey for today. We'll start with the pre-colonial vernacular of the 1500s, move through the Spanish and American colonial eras, cross over into the post-war reconstruction of the 1950s, and land right up in the contemporary vertical cities of the 2020s. And at every single stop, you are going to see how extreme climate, colonialism, and rapid modernization relentlessly shaped the built environment.
Let's start at the very beginning, with Section 1, Surviving the Tropics, the Baseline Era.
Long before formalized urban grids or foreign colonizers ever showed up, early indigenous dwellings were brilliant, hyper-local responses to a really intense environment. We're talking about surviving year-round high heat, pervasive humidity, and torrential monsoons. The quintessential solution to this tropical puzzle was the Bahay Kubo, or the Nipa hut. But hey, don't let its humble materials fool you. This was a highly calibrated passive cooling machine. It was elevated on wooden or bamboo stilts to protect against seasonal floods and ground-dwelling pests. But here's the real genius. That elevation created a space called the silong. Because the bamboo floors above were permeable, cool air would flow right through the silong and naturally, passively cool the inhabitants from below. Add in a completely open floor plan with zero internal partitions for maximum cross-ventilation, plus a steeply pitched roof to trap rising hot air, you've got a bioclimatic masterpiece.
Now, what's truly fascinating is how different regions brilliantly mutated this baseline design to survive their own brutal microclimates. Up in the freezing Cordillera Mountains, you've got the Ifugao Bale, a totally windowless structure with heavy thatch designed specifically to trap heat. Then move to the northernmost Batanes Islands, where relentless typhoons tear across the land, and you find the Ivatan Sinidaparan. That one is built with massive limestone walls and heavy rope nets literally pinning the roof down against gale-force winds. And down south in Mindanao, the Maranao Torogan, which was the communal royal house, was built on massive tree trunks resting on round boulders. Why? Because during an earthquake, that friction-based foundation allowed the massive structure to literally roll and flex instead of shattering to pieces.
Which brings us perfectly to our next major shift. Section 2, Adapting to Earthquakes during the Spanish Era.
So in the 16th century, Spanish colonizers arrive, and they're wanting centralized towns and rigid European permanence. But importing heavy European masonry directly onto the tectonic volatility of the tropics, yeah, that was a deadly problem. Early Spanish stone churches and buildings were utterly rigid. When the inevitable massive earthquakes struck the archipelago, these heavy stone structures resulted in catastrophic collapses, tragically crushing their inhabitants. A radically new engineering solution was desperately needed.
And that solution turned out to be a brilliant architectural hybrid. We transitioned from the Bahay Kubo, which was lightweight, highly flammable, and communal, to the Bahay Nabato, or House of Stone. It completely resolved the tension between the colonial desire for monumentality and the harsh geological reality of earthquakes. How? Through a dynamic bipartite system. The ground floor was a solid, immovable stone base, but the upper floor, it was constructed entirely of flexible, interlocking Philippine hardwoods that could actually sway independently during the seismic event without collapsing.
Visually, the Bahay Nabato looks like a massive European departure from the Nipa hut. But functionally, it actually stole its absolute best survival tricks from the Kubo. To survive the tropical heat, it utilized those indigenous passive cooling principles, but on a grand scale. They added the volata, an overhanging gallery acting as a massive thermal buffer to shade the inner rooms. They used translucent Kapis shell windows to diffuse light and block out harsh heat. They installed ventanillas, which are these tiny sliding doors of floor level, just to catch cool breezes for people sleeping on mats. And my absolute favorite feature, the colado.
This is a beautiful, pierced wooden fretwork above interior doors that allowed hot air to constantly escape upward. By the turn of the 20th century, the Spanish era ends, and we enter Section 3, Engineering Public Health in the American Era. With the new American regime, the narrative tension suddenly shifts. The primary enemy shaping the home wasn't just the climate or earthquakes anymore. The new enemy was disease. Confronted with devastating epidemics of cholera and smallpox, their response was aggressive sanitary imperialism. Architecture was literally weaponized as a medical intervention, and the defining product of this era was the tzale. The tzale was an engineered crossbreed of tropical responsiveness and Western hygienic principles, completely designed under the strict mandates of the newly formed Bureau of Health.
The Dena Chalet brought about a radical reconfiguration of domestic space, totally abandoning those massive, fluid, communal spaces of the past. First, for the very first time in Philippine history, the kitchen and the bathroom were systematically integrated directly inside the floor plan to control sanitation. Second, spaces were rigidly partitioned to enforce Western concepts of individualism and privacy. And third, the physical elevation of the home was drastically lowered.
How low? We're talking just 1 to 1.5 meters off the ground. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would they abandon the high, flood-protecting stilts of the Bahay Kubo? Well, colonial medical authorities specifically mandated this modest height to physically stop Filipinos from keeping their domestic livestock, like pigs and chickens, beneath the floorboards. It was a direct architectural intervention to enforce what they deemed to be sanitary living.
But this orderly, sanitized progression of housing was violently interrupted. Moving on to Section 4, Density and Post-War Fracture. The tragic aftermath of World War II completely obliterated Manila's architectural heritage. In a climate of absolute ruin, a booming population, and desperate economic hardship, a severe housing fracture occurred. The sheer inability to rebuild fast enough split residential architecture into two diametrically opposed realities that honestly still define the country today. On one hand, you have the barong-barong, the architecture of pure desperation. These are informal, makeshift squatter settlements constructed entirely from scavenged refuse by migrants moving into the ruined capital. On the other hand, you see the rise of the organized middle class. Communities like Philem Life Homes introduced the sprawling, highly exclusive, walled-off suburban bungalow. It was car-centric, heavily reliant on modern concrete, and permanently set the paradigm for gated communities.
Which leads us directly to the present day. Think about it. In the past, we had horizontal, porous, communal indigenous huts that literally breathed with the environment. Today, pushed by extreme hyper-urbanization and a total lack of space, developers build entirely self-contained corporate ecosystems. We now live in sealed, vertical, heavily air-conditioned concrete condominiums. We have effectively built towering fortresses to keep the tropical environment completely out.
But the story doesn't end with us locked inside concrete boxes. Let's head to our final full-circle resolution. Section 5, the sustainable return and the contemporary revival. As the realities of climate change and soaring energy costs mount, there's a really powerful architectural counter-movement happening right now. We are seeing the massive rise of tropical modernism and neo-vernacularism. Modern Filipino architects are realizing that, you know what? Our ancestors actually had it right all along. Instead of relying entirely on artificial air conditioning, architects are fusing advanced modern structural engineering with the undeniable bioclimatic brilliance of the deep past. They are essentially building the modern Bahay Kubo. Contemporary luxury design is explicitly readopting ancient survival tactics. Architects are using high-performance modern steel and concrete stilts to lift living spaces way above worsening urban floods. They're bringing back steep geometric roofs to rapidly shed monsoon rain. They're implementing deep architectural shading, like concrete sunbreakers, and they're returning to massive open floor plans for strategic natural cross-ventilation. We are well and truly coming full circle. So, the crucial takeaway here is that architecture in the Philippines has never been static. It's a relentless adaptation. Which leads me with a question for you to consider today. Take a look around where you live. Does your home fight against its environment, constantly battling the elements, or does it intelligently adapt to it? The centuries-old lessons of Philippine heritage prove that true resilience comes from working with nature, not against it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you never look at a house the same way again.